Welcome to the Border Chronicle Live. We do this every Friday to summarize the stories that we publish for the week, and also to share with you some interesting stories from various publications around the web that have to do with some of the issues that we cover. If you're a subscriber, you get that in your email after our Friday live video roundups. But thanks for joining us today. I'm here with Todd Miller of the Border Chronicle. Of course, Todd, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, Pablo. Thanks. Great to see you.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about the pieces that we published. I did a piece on what's going on in Tamaulipas, Mexico. Basically, Mexican protesters are pushing back against SpaceX in Texas. And, many people, some people know that, some people don't, but that Starbase facility in Texas is actually just 3 miles north of Mexican beaches. And so some of the effects that we've been seeing from the SpaceX rocket launches in Texas now are being reported on the Mexican side. And I wrote a piece about that. And Todd, what was your impression of what you read in that piece? What stuck out to you?
So that was a great piece. I really liked how you took seeing it from the Mexican side, the Tamaulipas side, and really seeing how people were feeling the effects of SpaceX. Um, And it's often, as we all know, the perspectives on the Mexican side of the border are often put to the side or not focused on, especially in the U.S. media. So I found that really a refreshing thing, and just to hear, the different perspectives that people had here, to hear from the conservation groups, to hear about uh, even when a rocket launches 6 miles away, that you can hear it like a rock concert or something like that. Those sorts of images in the story are very vivid, and then it was also creepy too because the helicopters, like as the groups would go out and to protest, the launches or the launches that eventually got canceled, and these helicopters that would hover above them, sometimes very closely, that I know that you tried to identify in the piece. And there's a lot of like, well, we suspect that it might be this or that or SpaceX or maybe even Elon Musk himself, right? But that those sorts of that it seems to me like intimidation. But I yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your impressions, having dug deep into this story, and to see what was there anything that surprised you, or what are your general the overarching thoughts about it? And then is there anything that surprises you about the reporting that you did?
Sure. I mean, the expected part was the effects of the launches. We're talking about, you know, uh, the death of endangered species. We're talking
Mm.
about, industrial debris on the beaches. We're talking about
How many
structural
how many
damage.
turtles? There's like 900.
Well, 900 is what the organization I spoke to
Yeah.
said. They found 900 dead turtles under compacted nests in the sand, and so that's the same kind of stuff that we're seeing on the U.S. side. What really surprised me was during these protests, during scheduled launches that were being organized on the waters of the Gulf, we had these helicopters come out. One of these helicopters did these low flyovers over the protesters. Some of the organizers said they were afraid that the vessels would be capsized into the water. Um, we looked at public FAA records of who these helicopters belonged to. We couldn't identify them. One was owned by a trust. Somebody set it up as a trust. The other one was actually a private charter. So the company that chartered that particular helicopter could have chartered it to anybody, and that flight list, or that list of people who were either on the vessel or who contracted the aircraft, um, wasn't public. So we actually don't know who the helicopters belong to, but organizers say they felt intimidated by those flyovers. In this last scheduled launch, there were actually three separate attempts on three separate days by SpaceX to launch that rocket. And, the company said that it was due to problems in their systems. We don't know if they were actually motivated to move the launch because of these protesters in the water. Um, so a lot of questions to answer there, and we'll definitely be watching closely what happens at the next scheduled launch because these organizations are planning to continue protesting these these launches. So very, very, very surprised to see all of that.
And what by in the water, were they in the Rio Grande, or were they in out in the Gulf of Mexico, or where were they exactly?
Well, they were out in the Gulf of Mexico, and La Marina Mexicana, the Mexican Navy, they actually put out a public information press release, a document specifically for that launch that showed in the Gulf of Mexico the safe area and the danger zone where you can't be in during the launch. The organizers say that they were where they were supposed to be. Now, on the third day, they did end up canceling these protests because one of the organizers got a call from what you said was a U.S. agency. He wouldn't say who it was, but he got a call from a U.S. agency saying that they were in the danger zone. He disagreed, but they ended up canceling the protest on that third day, and that's when SpaceX was able to launch. But looking at that map from the Mexican side, it looks like they were not in the danger zone, at least according to the Mexican Navy.
Uh,
And so that's where they were. That's where they hold the protest. I don't know where they're going to hold the next one. They don't know where they're going to hold the next one.
do
Could
you know when
possibly
the
be on the
launch
dune.
is? Yeah.
The next launch hasn't been. There's no scheduled date, exact date for the next launch. But we'll definitely be watching closely. And if you check out the article, you'll see video of what I'm talking about. You'll see images of what I'm talking about from these organizations. And so we're definitely, so Mexico's looking into it, actually. We're definitely looking into it. But the Mexican federal government has sent a task force out there. They're sending a scuba diving team to check out some of the debris that's going to be underwater. And President Claudia Sheinbaum has said that she's looking into whether a lawsuit may be possible from some of this environmental damage.
Seems like it should be, right? The what you described in the piece, and just the turtles alone and endangered species. It seems like a lawsuit could easily be uh something, a result of what we're seeing here, or
You know,
I should say a successful lawsuit.
yeah, I mean, they're definitely following up with what President Sheinbaum said in terms of investigating what's out there, going out, looking at the debris, filing these reports to see what actually happened. Is Mexico going to file a lawsuit against SpaceX? One of the things that you have to look at is the sort of political tension between the US and Mexico right now. And there's been a lot of aggressive back and forth on tariffs, a lot of aggressive back and forth on border security and military presence, possible military presence in Mexico. And so one of the things that's happening is that the USMCA, which is the free trade agreement between Mexico, US, and Canada, is actually getting totally renegotiated next year. And that's going to be a huge deal next year. We're going to hear a lot about that as it's moving forward and as those negotiations are happening. So that's kind of the lens that I see it is actually we've seen Trump and we've seen Scheinbaum do some things uh, that are for setting up leverage basically for those talks. And I think that ultimately, if there is a lawsuit, it'll kind of be in that context. How is it going to affect
Sure.
negotiations moving forward across
Yeah.
tariff, across USMCA, across border security? So very, very quickly evolving, sometimes tense, sometimes fragile relationship between the US and Mexico. And it sounds like, if you listen to Shane Baum and when she brings topic or the topic of our SpaceX, it's kind of around the talk of Mexican sovereignty against defending itself from U.S. encroachment into Mexico. So she's kind of spoken about it
Mhm.
in within that kind of language. So even though it's totally separate from the USMCA, although one could imagine that they put something into that trade agreement about space companies, space industry, um, and there's certainly and this is a whole other story, is actually the burgeoning space manufacturing industry in Mexico. Maybe I'll do a write up about that. There's actually a lot
Please.
going on there. So maybe that'll end up in the USMCA. Maybe, where the activists are expecting a lawsuit, and maybe Sheinbaum right now is using that threat to look strong to her base and internationally. Um, it's probably just as likely that they'll shake hands about it and make a deal at the USMCA in terms of doing the best they can for the burgeoning space industry. Um, we'll see. Well, space manufacturing industry, I should say, from Mexico. So we'll see about that. Um, whether or not
We
there
shall.
there will be a lawsuit, yeah. But I'm going to be following up on these protests and some of these organizations, looking a little bit more closely at two particular things. One of them, yes, is the structural damage of houses in Tamaulipas that go back for generations. I mean, these are very old houses that are getting affected by these blasts. If you read my story, there's information in there of scientific studies that show structural damage to buildings, this kind of infrastructure. But the other one is, and I didn't mention in my story because I didn't see any scientific connection of whether it's related or not. But there has been a huge reduction in fish from the Gulf, seafood coming out from the Gulf since the blast started. And so a lot of families in Tamaulipas who live off of the seafood, they fish, they sell it to restaurants. They sell it themselves on the beach. They're saying it's because of SpaceX, and you know, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that. Why is that seafood diminishing? I know we've seen a little bit of that on the Texas side, and that's had a few different causes, but definitely something worth looking into. Um, but things are changing greatly in Tamaulipas in terms of the Gulf of Mexico and all of the the families and the industry around that's connected to that in Mexico. Um, that's up on the Border Chronicle now. You can check that out. The other story we had this week, Todd Miller Todd wrote really a very powerful piece, and I mean, I read through it two or three times. That really brought together so much, I guess, history. You know, this century, going back to 9/11, connecting everything that's happening right now in this political moment. So I wanted to ask you about that. And, you talked about the anniversary of 9/11, which I think 9/11 got a little bit overshadowed by this horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk, a right wing figure that we're all seeing in the media right now. But tell me a little bit about this piece. Tell me a little bit about your reflections that came together in this for that.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, of course, everyone knows yesterday was the 24th anniversary of 9/11, the September 11th, 2001 attacks, that happened in New York and Washington, and and also, it was the 4-year anniversary of the Border Chronicle. We started for 4 years ago yesterday with our inaugural piece was a piece on 9/11, about 9/11. And so there's that kind of dual history. And I guess you could add in September 11th, 1973 with Chile and the overthrow of Salvador
Mm,
Allende from with Pinochet, the dictator
right.
that, yeah, to be in Chile. That was another September 11th. I guess we could go on and on about September 11th, but my piece that appeared in the Border Chronicle yesterday on September 11th. It I think is somebody not muted? Do you hear that? I hear somebody's voices. I don't know.
Mm,
Maybe I'm hearing voices that are somebody. It sounds like they might not be muted or something. Um, I so my piece was basically like you said, Pablo. Looking at the the what how much that date and the subsequent formation of and creation of the Department of Homeland Security, how much that has impacted the borderlands in massive ways. And I looked at it through the lens of actually a tarantula, and the tarantula was I was up with a student group from the School of International Training just a week and a half ago, up at a surveillance tower about 10 miles north of the U.S. Mexico border, an Elbit Systems tower, an integrated fixed tower built by the company Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli company. And we were up there and looking at the tower, and I was talking a bit about the tower and the 50 towers in southern Arizona and how they form a part of this so-called virtual wall, or a technological barrier that reinforces the border wall, right? And so we were up there, and as we hiked up the hill from the tower, and there was a tarantula in the middle of the path, which I at first I immediately thought, well, that's such an interesting contrast. There's a tarantula versus the tower. So I got down and I took a picture of the tarantula, and that started a sort of meditation on 9/11 for me, right? The tarantula, in the sense that, look at this ecosystem here, look at these creatures that have been here. The tarantulas themselves have been around for 120 million years, and versus the tower that has been there for since 2015, right? So that contrast alone, there's so many questions like, so in 100 years or 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years, what will still be here and what won't? And we know the answer to that question. And so just to look at it from that sort of perspective, but also looking at that history of how much has happened since 9/11. And I'll leave it to you all to go and check out the essay in the Border Chronicle, but it goes through, the different, the secure border initiative, and the virtual wall program, and the contracts to Boeing Corporation, and the contracts eventually to Elbit Systems, and the Secure Fence Act of 2006, and how a lot of what we've seen, this fortification that we've seen throughout the borderlands, how much of it has come from these massive budgets that really just infused the newly found DHS, the new agencies at the time, which are CBP and ICE, and just put countless dollars into their coffers with a counterterrorism mission, right? So it's a mission of war. It goes back to an idea that a lot of ways the border and border enforcement should or has to be looked at as an act of war. And so just looking at all of that coming up to the present, and but also so looking back, but also it takes a turn midway, or about midway, and then tries to look forward, right? So what do we do with this? And I bring in a lot of different points of analysis, like what has been Trump doing? What did the Trump administration do last week? The renaming of the Department of Defense, the Department of War, the meme he put out about loving this quote unquote smell of deportations, the missile blowing up a Venezuelan boat and killing 11 people, and and all of those things trying to come together into what we have now and how we might move forward. Um, and so I don't want to give away too much about it, but uh, it ends with an art studio that started in Nogales called La Linea, and it started in 2019, and it was an artist's response in Nogales to the razor wire, the concertina wire, being put up on the border wall, and the studio itself came out of the sort of wreckage of retail shops in Nogales that closed down a lot after 9/11 because when the border shut down, then a lot of the retail couldn't persist, and a group of artists took over one of the vacant buildings and have put in this art studio, an art center, a community art center, binational community art center that brings in artists from both sides. And by artists, I want to say visions of a new way forward that does not divide the border, bifurcate the border, right? It brings people on both sides of the border together to think about how to move forward in a new way. And so basically that's the piece, Pablo. It was a big piece just trying to wrap the mind around 9/11. Unfortunately, for the piece, there's all this other news yesterday when it broke. So a lot of thinking. I mean, in a way, I think this piece, while it doesn't mention at all like the assassination of or the killing of Charlie Kirk at all, it does accompany the sort of thinking around that, right? And what's been going on and where the world is going and the United States is going and different facets of that. So I think it does accompany that sort of broader analysis in certain ways, but it was definitely overshadowed by a lot of news around those happenings as well.
Sure, and I agree that it does give a lot of context. It doesn't fit into that, what is now an hourly news cycle of going over the granular, sometimes graphic details of what happened. But for those people who want to understand more about this moment politically, culturally, you do have to go back and look at how this country has changed since 9/11. And I'll ask you just one more thing about it. During the Biden administration, during the past Trump administration, DHS was such a huge thing, and everybody who was covering everything going around that, including immigration, but so many other things. And not many people, pay attention to DHS. And now it's being talked a little bit about more, kind of connecting it together at a time when what is really coming into the picture now is the Department of Defense, Department of War, the Pentagon, this totally new element that Trump's bringing into this current administration. My question to you, and you've actually written a lot about all this stuff, is do you think it would have been possible for Trump to do what he's done with the Department of Defense, the militarization, all the executive orders that he done, if 9/11 never happened, if GHS never existed, if we hadn't gone through that whole evolution, would that even be
No.
possible to happen today? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no way. Yeah, what Trump does today is definitely there's the only way he can do it is what can only be called, and as far as DHS is concerned, a massive, unprecedented buildup of border and immigration enforcement that's happened over in just since 2003, more than $400 billion have gone to CBP and ICE,
Sure.
and creating capabilities well beyond what these agencies had 20 years ago, right? That ICE could roam around cities and do what they're doing is because of these budgets that have been passed year after year. They grow year after year. It doesn't even matter who's in office. It doesn't even matter what party's in office. These budgets go up and up and up. So like when Trump came into office this time, he inherited a $30 billion budget, which was when he left office in 2020, it was $24 billion. So somehow that budget went up $6 billion between the time he left and the time he took office again, which means that the CBP ICE budgets, these are CBP and ICE. That's what I'm bringing those two
Sure.
agencies together. That just means that they went up during Biden. That's all that means. And all that means is not even to say what I'm trying to say here is not even to call out anyone. It's more that's the machine. It just, we have these budgets that go up and up and up and up year after year after year after year.
Mm.
It doesn't matter who the president is. And then when a president comes in like Trump, who then hits the accelerator or takes it to the furthest possible limits of cruelty, right? He can do it, right? Has these capabilities to do these sorts of things. So I definitely think, that's what yeah, he couldn't do it without the kind of budgetary or monetary power that has been built up for years. It's interesting too, because I went when I've seen them speak, and I particularly was particularly sharp at the Border Security Expo. I went there in April, and they were just Thomas Homan, the border, quote unquote, border czar. I still haven't figured out what that is exactly. And the Kristi Noem, of course, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. They're just so talking about how they just were building the border from nothing, right? Oh, we've been here for 3 months. Crossings have gone down by 90%, 94%. I don't know. They had all these stats that kept saying as if they had just built this thing out of nothing. And I just sat there and I'm sitting there thinking, all these people are part of the industry that have been getting contracts for years and years. They got to know that they're telling the truth here, right?
Yep.
This is actually something that's been built up. But that doesn't fit the narrative, right? So the narrative has to be, we're the ones that come in, we're coming from an open border situation, and we're going to come with the iron fist, and we're succeeding, we're almost there. I remember Kristi Noem saying, we're almost there, we're just maybe a week away from
Sure.
these lofty impossible goals, like of 100% what operational control of the border, or however they put it.
Right.
Mm.
Definitely check out Todd's article, everybody. I mean, it's a very timely meditation on everything happening right now, not just with the Department of War, but also what's happening politically right now in this country this week. My article's up on SpaceX effects in Mexico and how that's affecting the U.S. Mexico relationship. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next Friday.
Oh, can I mention
Sure,
one
yeah.
quick thing? September 25th, at between 5 and 8:30 in Tucson, we're celebrating the 4th anniversary of the Border Chronicle at a place called Slow Body. It's like a brewery. So please, if you're in Tucson, if you happen to be in Tucson, Pablo, I don't know if you're going to be able to make it over here, but
I'm gonna try to
just
make it.
want to. Oh, cool! That would be awesome to see you here. But
Great, great.
that's
Yeah,
happening. That's happening in a couple weeks. So just letting people know.
fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much. And we'll be back with more next week. If you'd like to get the Friday roundup of all our best stories and stories from around the web, make sure to subscribe to the Border Chronicle to get those weekly emails. Thank you so much. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Pablo.
Bye.